I used to think cultural Christianity was some kind of impediment, some kind of barrier to faithful Christianity. I don't think that anymore. I think it's actually good for children and for families and for people to be raised with Christianity kind of being the norm of society. There's different challenges with that for sure. There's kind of a resurgence of younger generations coming back to reality in some ways. They're tired of the kind of woke ideology, and they're rejecting that. And they're like, what's an alternative? And the pastor is sitting there going like, hey, I've actually got some great news. It's all in God's word. I've got that.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans? Thanks for joining this conversation with Real Texans. We talk to folks who are trying to do great things in our culture and in our society. Real excited to sit down today with a Texan who isn't in Texas. Spend a few minutes here today with Chase Davis. He's the pastor of the Well Church in Boulder, Colorado. So, Chase, there would be some who would say you're a traitor. You have abandoned your home. You've gone, you've gone into the mountains with the crazy people. There are others though who would defend you and say, no, we need good Texans literally taking the gospel out to the peoples. Who's right? Who's wrong there?
Oh, the second party is definitely correct. I consider myself a Texas expat, Texian missionary to the pagans of Colorado. So I'm happy to be here. Like most Texans, I grew up loving Colorado, and so I'm very blessed to live here and minister here.
It is one of those great historic notes that there's a good chunk of Colorado, which used to be in the Republic of Texas. Now, unfortunately, it was not. The pretty parts of Colorado were not in the old Republic of Texas, but you're close to the historic Texas there in Boulder, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the map you're looking at. I've got that map in my basement here in my house, and I think technically I still reside in the original Republic boundaries. And so, just depends on what map you go off of, because I've seen it go west, east, all that kind of stuff. But yeah. I've definitely got that map in my home.
Okay, so but before we kind of get into the meat of some of the stuff I want to talk to you about, some of the great writing and podcasts that you've done, I want to kind of start with the basics. You're a Dallas boy, grew up in the Metroplex, went to high school in Dallas, but then you went to Texas A&M, near and dear to my own heart. What moved you to Texas A&M? Why did you want to go to Texas A&M and kind of pursue college there rather than do you think I'd read or you told me you had grown up going to Colorado? Why not go to the School of Mines or UC Boulder, somewhere like that? Why A&M?
Yeah, so my granddad graduated from Texas A&M in 1938. And he was somebody that was very passionate about A&M. I grew up when I was a baby, I would be stuffed underneath the bleachers before the Kyle Field remodel and everything. And so we were attending there, tailgating there. My granddad had seats kind of on the 50-yard line. So it was kind of, what we did as a family growing up. And the expectation, I am the oldest child in our family. And so the expectation, as far as I knew, was that you graduate and you go to A&M. There wasn't really another option out there. When I applied to schools, I only applied to A&M. The backup school wasn't in Colorado. It was some mountain town college in Colorado, because my theory was that if I couldn't get an A&M and fulfill kind of destiny and my family duties to go to A&M, I would just retreat into the mountains and hide out, because there would be so much shame built upon me. But no, my granddad went there. My mom went there. And so I was happy to go there. I mean, it's such a big part of my story. Almost in a weird way, it was like, going to A&M was kind of the ultimate goal of life, which I grew up a Christian. I knew that wasn't true, but it was such a central feature of our family's story. And so many relatives went there, and my granddad just imparted to me a great love for the university and the values that they passed down.
So, but going to A&M, you didn't go to Texas A&M, as I understand it, with a sense that you were going into full-time professional ministry. At A&M, you studied construction science. At what point, though, did you feel that call into ministry?
Yeah, so I actually began exploring opportunities for ministry when I was in high school. I went to a Christian high school in Dallas. And even when I went to A&M, I didn't really have a clear path of like, hey, here's how you build a career in ministry. That was never like my ambition in ministry. It was always, how can I be useful to the Lord wherever He plants me, wherever He places me? And I felt that getting a degree in more of a hard science, more than like English or history or something like that at that time, would have been more productive and opened up more opportunities for me to either be a missionary overseas where I could practice tent making like Paul, so to speak, where Paul would travel around and have a vocation that was not necessarily being a missionary so he could support himself. And so I wanted to get a practical degree. I actually started in landscape architecture. My dad owns a landscape and irrigation company in Dallas. And so there was some kind of exploration of like, hey, do I want to go work for him and be part of the family business? But architecture turned out to be very demanding. In terms of time, I was up till 3 a.m. in the Langford building at the time doing sketches and drawings. They had me do art projects, and I had never done art before. And so I switched to construction science, and it was much more my speed because we were doing like slump tests and soils analysis and takeoffs, depreciation schedules on a bulldozer. And so in my mind, it was always a practical degree that was something I could use and apply in a wide variety of contexts, whatever kind of ministry opportunities might come my way.
So after A&M, you kind of followed that interest to Colorado in being in the mountains. You didn't have to retreat to become a mountain man at 18. Instead, you did so in your early 20s. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing up there and how that then moved you into ministry.
Yeah, so I moved up to Colorado 2 weeks after I graduated from A&M. My wife and I had gotten married the fall semester of our senior year. She's a fifth-generation Texan, grew up in Salina, Texas, just north of Dallas, which has changed a lot. Every time we go back, it seems to be just growing like crazy. And so my wife had come to Colorado a couple times. My granddad, who wanted me to go to A&M, also had a kind of summer hunting cabin in Gunnison County, Colorado. And it was right on the Taylor River, beautiful place. It's where I grew up going every summer. And so once we graduated at that time in 2009, the market for construction and home building and that kind of thing wasn't great, to put it lightly. And her degree was in recreation park and tourism sciences, and tourism wasn't, a priority for people in the market crash of 2008, 2009. And so we were like, hey, we don't really have a lot of job prospects in Texas in either of the industries we got a degree in. What if we just tried our luck in Colorado? So we moved up to Colorado, to Gunnison, thinking, my thought was like, hey, we've got a free place to live, essentially. Worst case scenario, I have to be a raft guide, which kind of secretly I always wanted to be. And so 3 days after I got here, I just met with a general contractor, a big one up here in Colorado and Arizona. And they offered me a job, and I was like, well, this is great. And then my wife got a job around the same time, and I'm like, well, we have jobs now, which we didn't have in Texas. So we just kind of took that as the Lord's blessing. As a Christian man, I wanted to go to church, and so I found a church. I thought I would, check out different churches. I grew up in a big church in Dallas, and just went to the local Baptist church there, and really connected well with the people there. And after about a year in construction, I was kind of like, okay, I kind of see how this career would work, but it's not really my cup of tea, in that industry and general contracting, commercial. It was like, you're basically going to be behind a desk for the next 10 to 15 years, and then maybe you'll be a project manager. And I was kind of like, man, I don't want to be moving around my family every year and a half chasing work and sitting in a job trailer in random towns processing paperwork and doing scheduling. And so I kind of fast-tracked, hey, what are ministry opportunities in front of me? Well, it turns out the pastor, one of the pastors of the church I was attending, he was looking at church planting. And I had never really explored church planting as a ministry opportunity. And so he invited me to pray and fast and kind of explore what it would be like to church plant. Before we moved to do the church plant, though, I still had, as most Baptist Christians do, kind of a heart for missions. I wanted to see more people know Jesus. And I thought that one of the ways we could do that is move overseas. And so my wife and I moved to South Asia, to an Islamic republic, and were missionaries there for a short stint. And that was a good season of testing to discern my calling, because we were not very good missionaries, and it was a very hard context. And so we were glad. I think it's funny when we moved to plant a church in Boulder, and we can get into, if you want, why we chose Boulder, but people were like, "This is crazy. How could you plant a church in Boulder? It's so liberal, whatever it is. They're not Christians." I'm like, man, this is a lot better than being, halfway around the world in an Islamic dictatorship. Let me tell you, like, this is still America, and people speak our language, and there's a Target my wife can go to. And so, like, it was an interesting season, but God provided opportunities as we just kind of sought what He might have for us. And I started seminary as soon as we planted the church as well. So I got a couple degrees from a seminary as well.
So, I graduated from A&M in 92, and things hadn't changed, that much, at least for the 15, 20 years since I graduated in 1992. And there was always a very strong sense of cultural Christianity, certainly at Texas A&M and generally in Texas. We're kind of at the the edge of the old Bible Belt, right? And Texas kind of held on to that culturally, maybe not as much today as in the past. Colorado is not that. I know we joked about you're going off to the pagans in Colorado, but there is a sense to which maybe that in Colorado they've been more honest about their culture maybe than we in Texas have been.
Yeah, Colorado is an interesting place culturally because, in Texas, I grew up in, it was private education, but I think this is true for most Texans. They hear the stories of the Alamo and our history, and there's what I call a thick culture in Texas, where you're kind of raised in a certain way of life. And in Colorado, what I noticed when I moved here, and this has been true for a long time here, is there's not so much of a thick culture. There's not a lot of state pride. There's state pride in kind of the sense of like their freedoms and liberties. It's very libertarian, and skiing and recreation and outdoorsmanship. But in terms of the stories they tell themselves, because liberal media has been so powerful here, what they'll most celebrate, or I guess mourn would be the right way, are different tragedies that have occurred. Rather than celebrating the industriousness of the frontiersmen that came and either opened mines or conquered the West or anything like that. It's very much the stories we're told here are very depressive. Look how wrong we were to conquer this land, whatever it may be. And so it's an interesting place. But yeah, that's part of what appealed both about a town like Austin in Texas and a town like Boulder and generally Colorado is that, I used to think cultural Christianity was some kind of impediment, some kind of barrier to faithful Christianity. I don't think that anymore. But yeah, you do kind of get that out here, more of a, like you said, honest, where it's more stripped down in terms of how people choose to live, and they're going to be upfront with you with what they're struggling with or what they believe. Up here, when I tell people I'm a pastor, they typically don't stop cussing and they don't apologize for cussing. There's just no sense of cultural Christianity. And that's unfortunate, because I think it's actually good for children and for families and for people to be raised with Christianity kind of being the norm of society. There's different challenges with that for sure. But I think it's better for most people to live that way, because otherwise you're going to have cultural something. And the alternative right now that's offered in places like Colorado and many other places in the United States is cultural paganism, where there's just kind of an entertainment of all these strange ideas, whether it's straight up Satanism, the occult, tarot cards, sage cleansing your house, all that kind of stuff. Very, very Austin-esque, or at least old Austin as far as I knew it. And so, yeah, there was an appeal to kind of reach people in that kind of context where the gospel theoretically would be more clear. There's a clear delineation between what it means to be a faithful Christian and what it means to not. Whereas in Texas and other places, like you said, the Bible Belt, it can be more challenging to get people to really truly follow Christ, because Christianity is kind of assumed. Like I'm a Texan, therefore I'm a Christian. I'm an American, therefore I'm a Christian. That kind of sentiment. Whereas up here, there's not a lot of that.
So a couple years ago, you wrote an article in the American Reformer, and it was about the decline of a particular movement in Christian circles. Probably don't need to get into that, but a lot of the points that you made in that piece were very eye opening to me and tracked road and talk about the sometimes the arrogance that some of us can adopt as Christians, and the way that in many ways contributes to creates an impediment to discipleship and to evangelism. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, so a lot of times in Christianity, we kind of live naively in terms of how we expect people to hear the gospel. And so what can happen is we can become kind of blind to some of our own stuff. I mean, Jesus talked about this all the time. And instead, we should live honestly before the face of God and with others in such a way that we really don't have anything to hide. You know, in that article, I think I know the one you're talking about. I also talked about kind of the big sort. There's kind of a reshuffling of the deck. I know in Texas, there's been a lot of movement from California into Texas, and the same has been true of Colorado. Up here in Boulder, we get a lot of California transplants from the Bay Area who are tired of kind of the Bay Area way of life in terms of the liberal elites kind of enforcing their way of life upon them. And so they moved to Boulder for a more kind of laid back lifestyle. Unfortunately, they still bring a lot of their political opinions and cultural opinions with them. And so they, you know, during the times of lockdowns and all that, Boulder was often looking to San Francisco as far as policy governance and what rules to follow, which is quite unfortunate. But I think in the church, you know, one thing, whatever context we're in, I think we need to be more honest with like what we're up against and what we're facing. And so many Christians, they want to kind of live naively, either in between right or left or what other paradigm they kind of paint. And instead, we should just embrace the Bible and reality and say, no, this stuff is not good for people. And we can prove that from the Bible, of course. And as a preacher, that's what I do. I try to articulate the Word of God for all of life and the gospel and how it applies to people. And so I think there's a huge opportunity, and that's what I would encourage other Christians to see. There's kind of a resurgence of younger generations coming back to reality in some ways. They're tired of the social media algorithms. They're tired of the kind of woke ideology, and they're rejecting that. And they're like, what's an alternative? And the pastor is sitting there going like, hey, I've actually got some great news. It's all in God's word. I've got that. And so if we can just kind of reclaim that instead of turning up our nose at the opportunities right in front of us. And that's what I see in Boulder. You know, there's a lot of opportunities in Boulder. So many people are not Christians here. So there's only upside in terms of sharing the gospel here because there's so many people who don't know Jesus yet, and we want people to know Jesus. And if we'll just kind of like learn to speak the Bible more normally, more practically for people, and really call people to repentance. That's missing in a lot of preaching today, talking about the reality of hell, stuff that typically is perceived to be like Bible thumping or fundamentalism and stuff like that. That's not what it is. It's just traditional Christian preaching, where you preach on the reality of sin and the need for redemption in Jesus Christ. And so just that message alone goes a long way in a culture like this one.
You know, when you talk about the reality of hell, I've taken groups to Israel in the past, and I do writing out. One of my favorite places to visit with folks about the reality of hell is at Caesarea Philippi, where today, beautiful park, beautifully preserved archaeological site, but of course, 2,000 years ago, it was a site of really grotesque pagan worship, and that is where Jesus took his disciples in this place that was considered wholly unclean. Good Jewish boys didn't go there. But Jesus took them there in many ways to do what you're saying, the idea of confronting reality, confronting the reality of sin, saying it. But the good news is we're going to prevail against this. The good news is there's a victory. And a lot of times it feels like we don't want to get dirty, but in many ways the gospel is a gospel of getting dirty, isn't it?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Bible is it's a very, and I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's a very earthy book in the sense of like it connects to all of life. It's not earthly as in earthly or worldly in a sinful way, but it's very like confrontational with everyday life. And so when we preach the gospel, when we share the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, we're not talking about some kind of spiritual placebo that you would take to just kind of a self-improvement drug that you can just enhance your life. And I'm going to be preaching on this Sunday. Hopefully I won't spoil my sermon on this episode, but, talking about how, look, Jesus isn't just an accessory to your life to make your life better. Jesus is everything, or he's nothing to you. And so this is a stark confrontation. You can either follow Jesus or not. And if you choose not to, then you will go to hell. These are very plain realities for anyone that grew up in the church and anyone has kind of any kind of cultural Christianity background. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's just foreign preaching to them. They don't really understand it. And for a lot of people today, they don't even understand the reality of sin. And when you're reaching kind of a culture that is not cultural Christianity, you have to do a lot of legwork because people aren't even familiar with the story of Noah, much less Moses, Abraham. These are all foreign characters. I grew up with them as kind of felt characters in Sunday school and Awanas and all that kind of stuff in the church. But for a lot of people, they don't even know the basic stories, which again is a wonderful opportunity to educate people and to help people understand the Bible. So it can be really unique. But yeah, there is a confrontation that needs to happen. And a lot of Christian preaching, instead of even taking advantage of that opportunity, they want to get rid of the confrontation, make sure everybody feels inclusive. And that's what I found so interesting, is that a lot of the DEI woke stuff, the same words that they adopt, diversity, equity, inclusion, many churches will adopt as kind of like peak Christianity, this inclusion. And what we've tried to educate our church on is like, no, it's both inclusive, but it's also very exclusive. You either follow Jesus or you go to hell. Like that's an exclusive statement. And so when we make Christianity kind of this inclusive thing, it's no wonder that so many churches and preachers get co-opted by the culture, because they're just saying the same thing everyone else says.
Yeah, there's that sense to which one of the greatest skills of Satan is to pervert that which is good into something that's bad. Diversity is a good thing, but it can also be a really bad thing. And we find that just in item after item after item in our lives, where we take that which is good and we allow it to become rotten. But we sometimes decide we like the taste of rotten apples. We like the taste of the rotten stuff, and that's where we have to be much more willing to confront that in ourselves and those around us. You've written so you mentioned seminary and several degrees. You're I think like a good number of pastors. You're almost a perpetual student. You kind of have to be kind of called to that, I guess. But in preparation for a graduate degree, you wrote a thesis that you then turned into a book, I guess a little over a year ago now, called The Trinity Formulation. Wonderful book. I downloaded it and thought, oh, it's going to be some thesis, and it's you changed out 4 words and pretended like you dumbed it down. And in fact, it was a very approachable book. Really enjoyed it. But you're walking through a different way to look at discipleship. The idea of moving from evangelism, where we leave everyone, drinking warm milk in the corner, to how do you help people take on the meat and potatoes of a robust life? If you don't mind, kind of walk a little bit through what prompted you to write the Trinity Formulation.
Yeah, so I wrote my book and my thesis mainly because what I saw in the church was a great deal of interest in discipleship and mentorship. You talk to any young person that grew up in the church, and they're going to be like, how do I get discipled here at this church? Which is a wonderful question, a fantastic question. But you ask any pastor, any church, they're going to have a different scheme. And I found that odd, because Jesus tells us to make disciples in Matthew 28, make disciples of all the nations. And so I feel like we should have a clear, kind of like more robust definition of what that means. Obviously, disciple was a first century term of someone following a rabbi and conforming his life to that rabbi's pattern of life. And so for many people, when they hear the word discipleship and being formed into Christ likeness, they reduce it into kind of one of 3 areas. They reduce it into head knowledge, meaning I need to get in a Bible study. I need to know more about the Bible. And yes and amen to that. That's fantastic. Other people, they really associate being conformed to the image of Christ in terms of having proper affections or emotions. So do I feel emotionally charged when I go to church? Do I feel on fire for Jesus all the time? And that's their barometer for Christian maturity. And then the other one would be obedience. Obedience is very important. Jesus says, if you do not obey me, you don't love me. If you love me, you'll obey my commands. And so what we want to emphasize is obedience, duty, and how we're formed in our duties. And I think, it really struck for me very personally when I think about my own life. I think a lot of the Christianity that I was familiar with was very duty was very muted, like obedience was very muted. I didn't like the church I grew up. I wouldn't categorize as fundamentalists, although some people would categorize obedience that way. And yet there's this kind of sense of like our duties actually shape our desires. You'll hear a lot of churches talk about how you can belong before you believe. And that's fine, if you want to invite people to church and then they come along in the faith and they begin exploring Christianity. I love that. At the same time, we cannot miss the fact that there's also a behavioral component to Christianity that informs kind of our life. And so that's what I think the contrast, we want to highlight the contrast, is for a lot of churches, they're going to talk about you can belong before you can believe, but no church in their right mind would ever say out loud, you have to behave before you can belong. And yet at the same time, there's truth in there. That the behaviors of Christianity, the kind of going to church, loving your wife, leading your family, all this kind of stuff, fulfilling your vocational duties before the Lord in all of life, whether it's simple things like showing up to work on time and doing a good job at work, or it's what we might call more spiritual things, is how most people think of it, doing quiet times and praying every day, that kind of stuff. Those kind of patterns of life shape who we become. A lot of times, if you want to know who you're going to be in 10 years, just look at who you are now and what kind of habits you have, and that's going to shape who you become. And so that's kind of a missing component I saw. So in the book, what I was trying to do in the thesis, I was really trying to explore these three components. The most kind of common way of understanding it is head, heart, hands. But the way I try to articulate in the book is duty, doctrine, and devotion, that all three are important. And when anyone who's interested in exploring Christianity, they may key in on one of those for a time, but it's important to be kind of well-rounded in our discipleship, in our formation into Christ-likeness, and not forget that it's believing the right things. We need to have good doctrine. We need to have affections for God and for the things of God. And we need to obey God in all of life. And that obedience is going to sound harsh in a world that's fairly lawless and libertarian, because most people in their flesh, they do not want to submit to the ways of God. They do not want to obey God. And yet we see all throughout the New Testament that this is a really big deal.
So in addition to folks heading over to Amazon and getting a copy, print or virtual copy of the Trinitarian Formation, there we go, get all those syllables to come out. Besides that, you write fairly regularly on a number of platforms. They can follow you on Twitter. But if folks find themselves in Boulder, Colorado on a given Sunday, how can they find your church and how can they meet up with you?
Yeah, our church is called the Well Church. We meet at 300 South Broadway, a wonderful building we just got just this past year. We moved into it. And so we have services at 9 a.m. and we've got Easter coming up, which is a great time. But we have visitors from Texas all the time because they're always coming to Colorado, and I love meeting fellow Texans that venture up this way. So yeah, the Well Church, you can visit our church website at boulderwell.org.
Outstanding. Well, J. Chase Davis, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for taking the good news to the people of Colorado.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for joining us here on this edition of Real Texans.